Welcome to Success Your Own Way, a podcast about how real people define and redefine success throughout their careers. Hosted by Tina Shurick and Ifat Rogers, this show features candid conversations with guests who've made intentional choices, navigated change, and built lives aligned to their values. Their guests share their stories as well as strategies and tactics that help them along the way. Tina's a certified coach and a former corporate leader who supports professionals in making confident, values-driven decisions. Ifat is a consultant with a background in food science and engineering, helping people solve complex problems with a practical, no-nonsense approach. Each episode offers inspiration and actionable insights for anyone rethinking what success looks like in their life and how to get there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Success Your Own Way podcast. Today, we are very excited to have Dan Neissany join us. I'm going to turn it over to Ifat to introduce Dan.
Thank you, Tina. Dan is a business strategist, leadership advisor, and co-founder of Best Practices Strategies. He has helped companies scale from small teams to 150 plus employees and has guided founders and executives towards strategic clarity and measurable growth. Today, founders and executives turn to Dan when they need strategic clarity, operational discipline, and leadership accountability that leads to measurable success. Dan is the co-host of All Things Locks podcast, creator of the Locks Protocol, executive producer of the Amazon TV show 60 Day Hustle, and the author of The Problem. I'm the Problem. Take your leadership skills from toxic to transformative. Welcome, Dan, to our show.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Thank you very much, ladies. Beautiful intro. It's probably better than anything I can say about myself, so I appreciate that.
That's always great. So, Dan, we only met a couple of months ago in the public speaking event course that
Yes.
we took together, and I was so inspired by your story. So, why don't you tell it to us?
Well, it goes back 43 years. I'm only kidding. So anyway, so my professional story, I think that's what you meant. So I started my career as an entry-level physical therapist. I have my doctorate. Very proud of that. Treated patients, very high level, got promoted just because I was really a great producer, which I think is very similar for a lot of people. You're working hard, making the company a lot of money, therefore you qualify for a leadership role. Not knowing what the hell I was doing cost the company actually a lot of money in turnover, retention was horrible, and just got to a point where I think like a lot of people where you want to blame other people for their, especially employees, you blame the employees. Can't be me. I'm working 60 plus hours a week, busting my ass. Has to be you. And, after just doing that for so long, I just had to take a look in the mirror and more or less just see that really, and that's the title of the book, is that it really was me. Like I actually was the problem. I wasn't leading as effectively as I thought I was. So just really spent a lot of time really bumping up my leadership skills, connecting with the team, which I hadn't done before, and really got myself to a point where I was just developing other leaders. And throughout that whole journey, got to a point, plateaued in my career. So was looking, what do I really do with my career? I don't like to just be stagnant. Simultaneously, my wife was going through some seasonal depression struggles when we were living in New Jersey. So just basically decided at that point I would resign, gave my company, basically a year's notice, and then we just moved out to Las Vegas, and here we are.
That's amazing. Wow. And
Yeah.
I love the self-awareness that you shared, Dan, with our audience here around taking some accountability for some of your struggles, and also the acknowledgement that sometimes the best producers don't make the best leaders. And so I'd love to dig in on that a little bit more with you, which is, in your mind and from what you've learned over your career, what does it take to really become a successful leader?
I really think what you just nailed there is primary, which is self-reflection. So I didn't do it initially. That's the thing, right? I'm not a big fan of when people propose that question of if you can go back in time and change things, yada yada. I always say I wouldn't. The one thing I wish I probably would do is just shorten the time frame in which it took me to actually start realizing some of my own mistakes. So I would definitely be self-reflection as number one. And then the second aspect of it, if you're actually leading a team, is to learn what it means to actually connect with them. And I do think there's still a lot of business advice, not as much as it used to be when I was younger, of don't become closer to your employees, right? You don't want to be friends with them because then they'll take advantage of you. And I just took that at face value and just kept up such a wall, which was really causing a lot of the issues. So outside of being able to critique yourself honestly, it's also understanding what does it actually look like to support your team in a way that, all right, yeah, you don't have to be buddy buddy with them, going out to a bar, having them over your house for a barbecue, but how do you show up as a real effective leader in terms of being able to support them the way they really need you to show up to support them?
Yeah, I that resonates with me a lot with especially reflecting on some of the clients I've been speaking with recently who have been peers with people they now lead and manage, and how challenging that balancing act can really feel, moving from that peer friend to ultimately management, which requires a relationship in many cases, but not as close of a relationship as maybe you once have. So that's what
Yeah.
was sparking for me with that.
No, that's a very fair point. That's a struggle a lot of people go through, right? It's like, hey, we're really good friends, but now I'm technically in charge, or I'm in charge of you, or I'm at least being held accountable for your results. So it is a different way of, now things that you might let slide in the past because you're buddy buddy, you can't do that anymore. So that is an
Right.
aspect where a lot of people get tripped up. And then the aspect of producers going into a management or director role, which is what a lot of companies' criteria is. Whoever makes us the most money, that's the person who becomes the leader. I understand this now, but what works in one role doesn't obviously always mean it's going to work in the next role. And I do believe that's where a lot of companies get tripped up. It's you're doing really well here, so that must mean you're going to do really well in this position. And then you have none of the skills to actually manage people because you never even learned how to manage yourself. So that's definitely something that I really had to figure out along the way. And you encounter some pain, but you do enough time to look back and really want to reflect and get better. Yeah, you do eventually figure it out.
Yeah.
It it's interesting. I was just thinking about a post just from a few days ago on LinkedIn where there was kind of the discussion of hiring more of producers versus kind of like, people earlier in the career, or more the producers and less of like the strategic and the leaders, and people
Yeah.
later in the career are doing more of the strategy and leadership, but they're no longer close to the subject matter. And one of my point was we're actually driven this way. We're driven not everywhere, not all corporations, not all companies, that we're driven to be like, okay, either you're a producer or you're a leader. We are in a lot of at least technical companies, technical industries, food being
Yeah.
one of them. You really need a strong producers that can lead. Like, you have to have the combination of the technical along with the strategic in order to really lead technical team. And I think that we're kind of losing some of it. And some of it, honestly, part of the reason I left, I was not happy just wearing one of those hats, either producer or a leader. And that is an opportunity that is lost. What is your perspective on kind of, do you go in progression in in career, at least in your field? I'm not as familiar with that field, where it's really more of a natural progression.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing, and I think that brings up the question of it's almost skills versus the person. It's what you see a lot in hiring now. It's can't find anybody who's got the personal skills and they understand the job at 100% level. So which one do I pick? Really do think it is dependent upon the position. I mean, for instance, I don't want to go to a surgeon who's a great people person and then a subpar surgeon. It's like, oh, but he's got great EQ. Yeah, it's like I don't care. Like the guy's operating on me. Can he do the job at the highest level? Like, so there are those positions where you gotta just say, can you actually do the job 100% effectively when it's necessary? But at the same time, too, though, I do think most positions, it's can you do the job really well? I look at it more so in terms of are they coachable? Because I think we just have to realize most people don't have that combination of I'm the greatest technical expert here, and I also am a leader of people. It's just very rare to actually find that. So for me, I look at it as rather find somebody who's actually going to be committed to the message that we have within the company. They're going to help elevate us with our culture, with really is a huge part of the company, and are they coachable for some of those things that maybe they're not so great at. But that for me is really what I look at. Minus those, like I said, those technical positions, the accountants of the world, like if they can't do their job, like I don't care if they're blank, like they got to do their job. So it really just depends on the person I'm looking for. But I think that's the way to look at it too. Is somebody coachable? Are you going to really be able to work with them? And frankly, if you're just one of those companies you say, I don't have the time to train, then I would probably go with the person who at least can do the job 100%, as long as they're not actually making your culture worse than what it is right now.
Yeah, I love that. If there is no other definition of an individual contributor is a surgeon in the middle of a surgery. So
Yeah,
yeah, definitely we'll take the those skills
yeah.
on bedside manners at that point. So
Yeah,
then I'm gonna
100%.
change gears just a little bit, calling this podcast "Success Your Own Way," and we talked about your career progression. How has your definition of success changed over time?
So when I was younger, like a lot of men, it's all about money, and it was more about money for me. It's just money and status was definitely the big driver, and yeah, it's just a lot of things that guys that they don't always overcome it. So that was my major thing back in the day. Um, Now it's just more so for me. Am I finding fulfillment and really just am I grateful? I mean, that's what I think success for me at this point has just completely changed because I'm making right now. I'm still building out my business, but I'm making less now than I was in the past. But I'm way happier now than I was then. So I think it's really the perception has to be, I love the name of your show. It's like your own way. Like what actually is the defining metrics for success? And that's where I don't believe a lot of people actually ever figure that out. Or if they do, it's just later, it's later on. Like again, like for me, it's like, success is the number one thing and it's all about money. And, I got to prove myself. And now it's just really more so, am I actually not just being more grateful and fulfilled, but am I actually helping other people? Am I really doing the things? And that's when I look at being authentic versus being inauthentic in the past, when I in my head thought I was an amazing leader, and then I started analyzing my own actions, and I realized I'm really just doing everything for myself. Even when I was working all those hours and busting my ass, it wasn't to help them. It was really more so about or like how people look and viewed me. So it was still for me. So that's where I look at success is how are you actually contributing to other people's wins? How are you growing yourself? And then how can you be grateful every day? And I'm not saying to use gratitude as a way to hold yourself back and be accepting of mediocrity, but
Mhm.
you can easily just turn on social media or the news and you should be grateful within like 2 seconds for what the hell is going on in the world. And then can you find fulfillment in what you have right now? So that's how I look at it. So definitely a big difference.
Yeah, 100%. That is, and I have to say, like, your definition of success is it's consistent with both men and women that we've had on the show, really. I mean, this idea of status and climbing the ladder and pay and all of that in our 20s and 30s, and then it seems to shift a little bit as people get into their 40s and definitely 50s. So,
Yeah.
very consistent. This idea
Yeah.
of self-reflection has come up a couple of times, Dan. And I'm going to ask you to do it right now, actually. When you think about kind of your history and your past, is there a decision or a choice that you made that you really feel has shifted the trajectory of your life or been a defining moment in terms of how you've come along in your life?
Yeah. I actually would say, and it's going to sound corny, but a little bit was getting married to my wife. And it's not just because of she's obviously my best support, my biggest cheerleader. But when I was younger, and I think about this periodically, and I always just find it very interesting that I did this. I didn't really actually have I didn't really have any goals. I wasn't looking that far ahead. It was just maybe yearly goals. It's like I want to get better at my finances or understand the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. But I was like, all right, I'm young, I'm in my 20s, making more money than I thought I'd be making in the position I was in. So like I'm good. And then as soon as I got, I proposed, I should say, just like that, I'm like, all right, now I'm not responsible just for myself. That's I view it very, through the lens of it's one thing if you want to screw up your own life, which I didn't ever think I was going to do. But yeah, it's all right. I lose some money, I lose it, like whatever. It's just me. Like I'm not affecting anybody else. Now like, I got somebody else's life that I'm greatly affecting by the decisions I'm making. So that really, it just made me step up as not just a man, but it made me step up as a person. It's like, all right, what is this? What do I want this to look like in 50 years? So what do I need to start doing now to actually prepare for that? And it wasn't just finances, because I think that's very easy. Like, I want to make, I want to have $3 million in the bank when I'm 60. So but I'm also looking at it as, here's the kind of relationship I want to have when I'm 60. What do I need to do now to make sure that happens? Especially, my parents are divorced, my wife's parents are divorced. Obviously, divorce is very high in the U.S. It's about 50%. So it's all right. What do I need to do to not end up like that? That's why I would say that is easily the number one decision I made.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing to that too, is I really, by nature, and it's still very hard for me, I really have no empathy whatsoever. Like, it is actually very hard for me to just, I'm just very, I know guys, we typically have that very practical, let's solve the problem mentality. I'm like really high up there. It's like, I'm at the top of that. It's like, all right, forget about the emotions. Let's just fix the problem and move on, which doesn't really always work for relationships. So actually, marrying my wife actually was really forced me to become more empathetic. She's very empathetic by nature. So I would say she actually has helped me be a little bit more in touch with the appropriate emotions and knowing how to actually build rapport with somebody. Like, that was actually really hard for me back in the day, which, you're working in medicine. You think it would be easy, but it's just really hard for me. So that's one little added bonus that I would say has just really helped develop my emotions to really help me connect with other people.
You should write a book about that. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Maybe I'll think about it. I'll put it on the list.
I think your perspective is really refreshing, actually, Dan. Like, we haven't had a lot of men on the show who have talked about their relationship like this, and the need for communication and getting in touch, and as well as being just really self-aware that empathy isn't a natural kind of way of being for you. So love hearing these perspectives. And I think it leads me to, I'm hearing kind of a little bit of a mentor-y relationship even with your wife in some ways. And I'm wondering, when you think about the mentors in your life, who are they and what role have they played in kind of helping you grow and develop to the man that you are today?
Yeah, I think the two biggest ones, and it took me really time to understand this, because if you asked me this 10 years ago, I don't think I would have said my parents, but my parents are definitely top of it, because, and I say that they really weren't the kind of parents to sit me down and have this, let's have an in-depth conversation about life. I never got that. And I used to, I don't want to say begrudge, but I think on some level I used to just come like, it'd be nice if they gave me some more advice on how to figure stuff out, but they let me kind of figure things out. And I've learned as I've gotten older that I really figured stuff out from them by just watching. My mom's got her ridiculous determination. I've always looked at my dad as my biggest inspiration, because he moved from a foreign country and not being able to understand a damn word of English, and built, a business that helped get from, with my mom, obviously, but he helped get me through college without any debt. So I look at those two as definitely leadership by example. I did have a mentor in the past when I, first started out in healthcare, which, that relationship evolved, but he really helped me understand what it meant to actually be a leader in the field. So I think it's just, one of those things too, where my evaluation of what a mentor can be has shifted. I think a lot of people look for, it's like, they want to use that as an excuse. Like, I've never had a mentor in my life, or I had crappy parents, or my boss was a jerk. And I think it's also easy to look at what people are doing around you, and instead of just saying, what are the good stuff they're doing? It's like, all right, what's the crappy things that they're doing, the bad behaviors that maybe I don't want to do?
Right.
So I can, it's like, if the boss is yelling, it made me feel like crap. All right, it's still a lesson for me to obviously not do that to somebody else. So I do think it's important to understand, if you get a mentor, whether you got to find one, work for free, pay for one, they're the right person. I don't say it's a cheat code, but it's definitely an accelerant for sure. But at the end of the day, if you can't even do that, just look at the people who aren't that good and just start acknowledging what's the opposite of what they're doing that would actually make me a good leader.
The anti-mentor, right? It's like a super villain or something. It's your anti.
Yeah, it really is. I had a really good mentor, but then I ended up seeing, at some point I got some clarity. I was like, hey, he's got me elevated, but then he had a habit of wanting to keep people just at a certain level. He didn't want to help them keep growing. And he ended up actually, I didn't know this, but he was very narcissistic. I just kind of looked past some of those behaviors, But again, like I went from disappointment when I finally figured it out to just, you know what, he's got some horrible ways of treating people and talking to people. Let me just do the opposite. So there's always learning lessons, and that's where I look at if you have the right mindset, be very easy to look at any situation and say, well, I didn't have this, or I can't make it because I never had a mentor. It's all right. Who's in your life that can still teach you some good lessons?
Yeah, love it.
I was working a lot on ideation development today, and there's an ideation called like ideal final result, where you need to kind of visualize this is what I want to happen, and then you try to put the path to get you there. And I like to take these like regular ideations and turn them into essentially what you said. What's the worst thing that can happen? It's like, okay, how do I prevent it? How do I not get there? And in your example, and honestly, I learned more about people I want to work with by working with people that I did not want to work with.
Yes.
It became clearer what kind of behavior is toxic and kind of energy sapping before I'm able to recognize, hey, this person or this project or this thing is actually helping me with energy. So, while it sounds bad starting with more of a negative spin on things, I think it provides clarity for what's positive and what we do want to do.
No, it does. I actually agree. I think it's actually easier to go that approach because we're just so, as human beings, we're so easily able to identify everything that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard for us to actually see what's really good. So even from that standpoint, you ask most people, who's the ideal person you want to work with? Like, they gotta be nice. But then you're like, all right, what kind of qualities do you not want to see? And it's like, okay, do you have 10 minutes? And they can list out everything they don't want. But I'm like, to your point, it's like, all right, you've just eliminated everything you don't want in a person. And that's really more important. You know, that's why I eventually approached medicine because again, I can, you know, if I was say treating one of you ladies and maybe it came in for shoulder pain, first thing that a lot of people want to do is say, okay, it's could be 10 different things. My thought was, all right, let's eliminate all the crap that it can't be first. And let's narrow it down to really what it could be. So I do think that approach of, all right, let me at least write down what I don't want. It's actually probably easier for most people. It's just that we don't do that. So we don't actually know the qualities that would actually eliminate somebody from ever getting close to us and having us, yeah, having them in our inner circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I we mentioned you mentioned the book just now. I'd love to hear more about this. So you wrote the book, I'm the Problem, Take Your Leadership Skills from Toxic to Transformative. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about what's in that book and give us some wisdom?
Yeah. And I will also say too, I did a terrible job. So advice for anybody who's out there, if they want to write a book, write it. Just don't do what I did and have no marketing plan. So throwing that out there, you got to know what you're doing afterwards. So there is a point where I'm going to probably go back and market it correctly and just fine tune some stuff. But overall for me, I went through a really challenging period. There's a lot of days when I was I was working with a team that I felt like a failure. I literally was walking out of the clinic saying, what am I doing wrong? Like, how am I such a failure? I just felt really embarrassed about some of the stuff that I think I over dramatized some things, but I just felt like crap. So for me, it was really figuring out, all right, how do I go from that to a point where I'm actually developing leaders? And what took me years, I was like, how can I actually help somebody else not have to take 5 years or so like it took me to maybe narrow that down and compress the time frame. So it's just really a matter of what was I doing, and then how did I flip it around. So that's really, it was just my journey of figuring out that I was the issue, that I was not as good as I really thought I was. And then what was my approach? Because honestly, I think it's very easy too to just say, well, let me work on 20 different skills. You know, my empathy is not great. My listening skills aren't the most amazing. I'm too direct with people. You know, I'm from a very dominant personality and I'm from Northeast New Jersey. So it's very, very to the point. So it's all right. How do I then also work on my communication stuff? So it could be very overbearing or overwhelming, I should say, where you're thinking, I got to work on a lot of stuff versus just, all right, how do I focus on maybe the most critical thing that's going to help me gain the most traction and just work on that. And then when I get good at that, all right, what's the next thing? So that essentially is what I more or less outline in a book, is just really being able to help people navigate through the journey. And also just, I think the biggest thing that we want to sometimes feel is that it's me. Like is it just me? You know, is anybody else going through this? I also just want to write it so if somebody else is like actually reading it, it's like, all right, I'm not the only one who has these challenges. I'm actually fairly normal. And when you start looking at the stats behind leadership, there's more crappy I mean, I think most of us know it's now, but there's more terrible leaders than there are really great leaders. But when you're in it, you think it's just you, right? It's like nobody else is going through this. So that was part of it too, is aside from outlining how to go through the process of proving yourself, it's just helping people understand it's just not me.
Yeah.
And I like it that it's in a book. I know I'm participating in a lot of different like cohorts and different places where you can talk, but there's a lot of vulnerability with appreciating needing the content and then consuming it. So some of the things I prefer, like, you know what, let me take this, let me review this and have my own time, and as you know, the old fashioned way, if you will.
Yes.
But book, and then you have a podcast. Can you share a little bit more about your podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast, All Things Locks, being leadership, operations, culture, and strategies for growth. So a little more of a healthcare focus, but we're really talking about everything I just mentioned. It's more or less what can you implement in your organization, what can you implement in your healthcare practice that's going to help you really grow. And it's not just meant for people who are, I think it's very easy to look at any business and say, okay, we're struggling, now's a good time to grow. What we really try to look at, help people understand too, is, all right, we're doing really well, but how can we get better? It's what if we, how can we maybe improve by 5% or 10% or 15% every single year? I mean, I think we know the old saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. But I do think at some point, a lot of business owners get complacent, especially when they're doing well. And then they end up becoming, maybe their standards start, dropping a little bit. So we try to not just have people from healthcare, we bring on people from across every industry, because that's the way, that was one benefit for me when I had my mentor. His background was in finance, so he showed me a very different perspective that I really liked. And in healthcare, I do see that there's this struggle between being very altruistic and being, and making money. And a lot of people think it's one or the other. So if I'm very altruistic, then I got to give everything away. If you're about making the money, that means you're treating patients like crap. So part of it too is showing people you can do both. You could treat patients really well and treat your staff really well and still make a good living as well. So that's really the whole point of it, is just to show them how to actually do it in a fashion that aligns with who they are. And then just let's focus on what we can control. It's very easy to, obviously, you can look at the economy, inflation, and what's going on in healthcare with insurance, which affects all of us, and say, well, it's easy for me to blame, I can blame everybody else, say this is why we're struggling. Really, the point of the show too is to just help people take a look in the mirror, take some accountability, and then understand, all right, there are things within the four walls of our business we can actually take control of that's going to help us grow.
Yeah. And I like the emphasis. We just had an episode a couple of weeks ago where Tina and I talk about, for just small businesses, it's the steady state when you can grow. It's harder to do some of these things when you're like in the day-to-day fight for survival and where is the next client. It's the steady state. It's when you're doing actually well that's easier to think about, how do I do better? How do I do the same, with less friction? How do I get to all of these things? So I like the point of, it's not really about I'm struggling, what do I do next? Is I'm doing well, what do I do next? So.
Yeah, and even for the people that just starting out, because that's a question I get asked, is when do I maybe implement some systems, or when do I always say, like, do it at the beginning, because then at your point, if you're either too involved in the business day to day to do it, or you get to a point where, all right, we're busy and we're getting a lot of people coming our way, but now we're too chaotic to actually be able to build out these systems and identify what are some of the key numbers, KPIs, so to speak, that we need to keep an eye on. I'll give you like a good example. It's a company, it's actually a close buddy of mine. She started a company, and he's doing a webinar, so he's gonna have a lot of people. I think 170 people showed up. And for me, I always look at what's the customer or patient experience like, because that it's, you can say everything you want about your company, but ultimately the person who's paying is going to be the one to decide, do I come back? Do I tell other people? So I go through their customer experience, and they had a website with, I got no communication through a link I clicked on. They had a PDF that it had a booking link, but the link was inactive. I downloaded the PDF, and I got no email or text. So some of that stuff. And I said to him, I was like, you're doing a webinar now, 200 people joined, 55 people booked for calls. None of them are getting email reminders. None of them are getting text reminders. And I know back in the day, we had none of that anyway. But if you're trying to position yourself a certain way, the goal really is, how do I provide the best experience for the customer? Like, that should where it starts. So that's the kind of stuff. All right, we're going to bypass that, get really busy. And then what's going to happen is we're probably going to lose some clients because the journey for them wasn't built out the right way. So that's why I look at these things and say, yes, you got to make money when you're at the beginning for sure, but start having some systems in place so that way as you get busier, you can actually service the people that you're trying to help to begin with.
Yeah. It really is the little things, isn't it, Dan? Like you have to make sure those details are in place. And with all the AI tools and things we have too, the automation can also feel so impersonal. So it's finding that balance of like, I gotta grow, and I want to do this at scale. I want to do this in a quality way, but I also don't want to lose the personal touch. And I talked with a lot of people who are kind of struggling with that. How do I find that balance between automation, personal touch, and continuing to bring people along with this great service experience? And I think healthcare is a really tough industry, as you said, kind of balancing that patient experience with, making money and scale and efficiency and all of that. I think that can be really challenging. So
Yeah, I do think, I will say a lot of businesses overcomplicate it, right? So they say, maybe something like that. It's like, hey, I want to utilize some AI, make things more efficient. I'm definitely more all for that, especially if it's, well, I have my front desk person calling people or sending out text. Like, all right, that's a waste of that person's time too. I mean, you could easily offload out. But then the same company, you ask them, when's the last time you got some feedback from your customers or clients? And I don't know, never.
Mm.
So I do think as technology becomes more complicated, sometimes we also just make our thought process too complicated. It's like, all right, what did businesses used to do? They just call a client. Or, when I was treating a patient, I was asking, like, is everything going accordingly to plan? Like, I know we spoke initially, but do you feel like you're as progressed as we thought you'd be at this point? Or, so, and I would just get some feedback from them, because I know if I didn't, they probably wouldn't say anything. It's like maybe 1 out of 100 patients that would actually say something to me if something wasn't going right. It's like, hey, this is hurting me, or I'm not seeing any improvements. Then other 99 are gonna not say anything, and
Right.
some of them are gonna quit. They're gonna quit before their plan was done, and then they're never gonna come back. They're never gonna refer anybody else. So I was like, behooves me. I mean, I want to make your experience as good as I can, but I also have some pride for my own benefit too, to get you better. And that's where a lot of companies, I feel, they don't do the greatest job. Is like, we get a little too attached to these things that we built out, like this product or the service. Like, well, I did it, I created it. All right, who cares? Like, you had an outcome, hopefully, that you wanted to gain with this new thing. Don't you want to maximize that outcome? So you got to essentially really manage the ego and just really be focused on, when you have that, we talk about growth mindset. I think some people don't quite understand what that means. Like, if you really truly want to get better and better and better, it's got to be the end user that in some of those instances actually is the guiding force on how to actually do that.
Right. Totally. You touched earlier in the conversation, Dan, about gratitude and feeling grateful. And so we love to ask our guests, what are those things that you're grateful for?
Oh my God. It's so easy nowadays, right? Because I think at the end of the day, we want to look for this magical thing. Like, all right, what can I really be grateful for? It's like, I don't know. Let's see. I'm not sleeping on the ground outside. I have a house. I have a really comfortable mattress. I got running water. It's hot in 2 seconds. It's things that it's very easy to take for granted. That's why it's kind of a lot of people, I got to make this country great again. What are you talking about, dude? Like, we're all doing better than everybody else in the world. Like, it's not that bad. Family, friends, my pets. Like, there's just and I'm living in Vegas, so the weather. So there's just so many things that it's the things that we take for granted, until you lose it. I remember people, they get a little tripped up on what can I be grateful for. It really is the small stuff, and really keeping awareness of those things. When you asked me at the beginning, how does success really play in, and gratitude, that is what it is. And it's every day I'm looking like, all right, what's all the stuff that makes my life just more amazing? It's never anything really that big. It's really the small things that we just take for granted every single day. But it really also, aside from just making yourself feel more fulfilled, having some kind of gratitude also really, it prevents you actually from digging up a lot of crappy emotions. Like, by nature, and nobody ever believes me, by nature, I have a lot of natural anger. It's just my personality. It's that dominant personality I have. Always have had it. It could be very easy to let that run my life, which at some point it has. But being grateful really is the ultimate buttress against all those crappy emotions that we want to feel.
That's perfect. Yes.
I think that's a great, great place to end. I love that message. So, Tina, as usual, thank you so much. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I always feel a little bit more on the spot when we have a guest that has their own podcast. I was like, well, I hope we measure up to the experience. Um, yes, to our listeners,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you taking a minute and listening to our episodes. We're also on YouTube, and download, share, subscribe, and keep following us.
Yes, let's go hit those buttons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
click, click, click.
Well, ladies, thank you very much for having me on. Definitely appreciate it. Much success.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Success Your Own Way. We hope you found this episode inspiring and took away actionable insights. Please tune in for our next episode, and if you know someone who is rethinking what success looks like in their life, please share this episode with them.